Thanks. Nice to be here. Is everybody's got the others who are here have got their mics off, so I can't expect any responses. But yeah, nice to be here. I wasn't sure, what the audience were and what you wanted, so I've just cobbled together some slides, a bit about me and a bit of the things that I've done.
That's perfect. Yes, thank you.
Okay. So here we go. So a brief bit of background. I mean, I'm very much a computer science and AI person. Back in the day, a long time ago, that was straight AI planning, in my PhD thesis. I was interested in problems, decomposition, sub-goals, identification of necessary possible orderings. It was a long time ago, but well, I was going to say more recently, not that more recently, 20 years ago. So work on landmarks, which has had quite some influence on in planning and planning heuristics. So stemmed out my PhD work, and at that time I was very much firmly wedded, and still am really. I guess it's my first love a bit, to the classic logistics, block stacking and so on. But interestingly, so after at one point, about 10 years ago, after about a career break, I came back to work and I joined Mark Kavatz's lab. I know you've probably studied some of Mark's, and I've worked a lot with Mark, obviously, into the wonderful world of interactive storytelling, interactive narrative. I started working on, it was a European project, the IRIS project, this integrating research and interactive storytelling, which was fantastic, actually. There was it was a number of, a network of about, I can't remember, it was about 7 European partners, in this joint endeavor in interactive storytelling. Here, I know everybody in the group will know I have a definition of interactive storytelling, but this is the kind of the framing in what I've always worked in the context that I've always worked in, and the endeavor to develop new media in which the presentation of a narrative and its evolution can be influenced in real time by a user. I've got an example. In fact, when I joined this project, it was one that Mark used, this film. It's great. I play it just because it's funny. I don't know if anybody knows the film or indeed speaks Italian. You can translate better than I can. But the context, for those who don't know it, Dr. Zhivago, this clip, Dr. Zhivago and his love, Laura, have been separated for some time, and he chances to see her on a, well, you'll see. There should be sound. Are you getting sound?
Yeah, there's a setting that you have to hit. It's there should be like a little up arrow on the share screen button, and it should give you some options that would say share computer sound. Or possibly under, like, there might be a ... more menu at the bottom. That
more.
Oh, that one probably isn't it.
It's funnier with the sound, but
yeah, it's pretty well hidden, that option.
On the more ... is it?
No, I'm not sure what it is on the Mac, but I think on, if you share screen, is there a little like up arrow caret on that button?
Oh, share sound, I found it.
Okay, great.
Yep. Oh, hang on. Mac, I've got to do all sorts of settings. Try again. Sorry about that, guys.
Oh, yeah.
So I hadn't, I forgot the context. If anybody knows the film, they'll know, but they've been following, these water polo players have been following this for a long time, and obviously they're massively disappointed when she doesn't turn around and doesn't hear him. I love it for a number of reasons, but it captures a lot of different things. There are a lot of times when we want a different ending, or we love being immersed in the world so much that we want to revisit it and have a different playthrough or a different run through. But also there's other things in there about the media and the way in which we interact, and we get really emotional about the things that we're watching, and we scream at the film or the TV set. So that sort of contextualizes where I'm coming from and the sorts of things that I'm interested in. I'll start playing it again. Oh, there we are. Next thing. So, and actually, as you're no doubt aware, it's not a new interest. It's not a new endeavor. You can trace the roots back. Early interactive cinema. The earliest I've found is this Kin Automata Czech installation interactive art experience, I guess, from the 60s, and various interesting examples since, some very strange and scary looking interactive horror and those sorts of things. The interesting thing now, or within recently, is that space of interactive entertainment and games, the possibilities afforded with 2D and 3D animation, game engines, content generation on the fly, cinematography and camera placement and character positioning on the fly. So you're not restricted by pre-recorded filmic content in the way that people were previously. So in the context of that, my research interest and where I'm joining this very much is that using AI planning for narrative generation in a number of different ways, the plot backbone, some kind of structure in which to scaffold a storytelling experience around, plans for individual characters, and also that process, because these are interactive systems, of plan, repair or regeneration in the presence of user interaction, hostile, problematic users. And also very much on the development of systems and interactive narrative systems. So there's some examples there: Merchant of Venice, more recently this one with Tuck the Hunter, in an educational context, networking and medical drama, which myself and co-authors have spun in a number of different ways. So what I've got now is just a collection of slides of things that I'm interested in, and work that I've done and things that I'm doing now. So the first of those obviously is narrative planning and generation, and there's a lot of questions and things around that. It's AI planning, but not as we know it for those AI purists. Things change, the normal rules don't apply. So there's these questions to do with what is the nature of the actions, what are they meaning, what are the objects in the domain, what are the quality criteria, what are the things that are important, if plan length and make span on suddenly the measures of quality of the plans that you're generating. And a really key thing, as we know in this space, is this replayability. It changes the game with AI planning, because you want to be able to revisit a narrative space and generate diverse sets of stories. There's also, we're very much in what I would say is an interactive storytelling or an execution loop, a plan and execute loop, using 2 or 3D graphics, film, text, virtual agents, could be robots, allowing for replanning or plan repair in the space of user interaction and feedback. And there's a host of questions alongside of that. One of these is to do with duality of character and plot. Are we looking at planning at a character-based level, defining the autonomous character's behavior and allowing a story to emerge? On the plus side, that's great because it gives us great flexibility and generative potential, all those things that we want, replayability, different stories. Because it's easy to generate a lot of rubbish. and the issue with that is, as you know, loss of control, poor narrative quality, difficulty to adhere to certain specified aesthetics for the genre of interest. On the other hand, the plot-based approach allowing for requirements of the plot and specifying, and they encompass the necessary character behaviors. What's great for the strength is the authorial control, narrative coherence, aesthetic properties. But of course, the actions become complex, over-engineered, there's a loss of generativity, and there's a huge burden in creating the models. Oh, excuse me, the perils of working at home. I'll carry on. So within that space, one of the things, and I think this is the paper of mine that you've looked at, and I mentioned this, the TISP paper from 2010, I believe, and the idea in that was very much,
this is very informal. If you need to go check that.
I will. My husband's around. Oh, he's getting the dog. He disappeared out into the garden.
These things happen. We're all working
carry on.
from
I'll
home
just
now.
carry on regardless. Yeah. So that idea in that, the idea of that was very much this decomposition approach. So we're working in a space of, forward state space search planning, and using a notion of authored pseudo landmarks, sub goals, author goals along the way, interesting points of the search space that we want to reach, and generating a narrative plan incrementally forwards to those called frontier landmarks, the next points of interest that we want to generate to in the story. And of course, the strength of that is it's incremental generation, the plan, it's good. There's no need to generate the full plan to an ultimate goal in a conventional sense. So it's more flexible in the space of user interaction. Of course, there's an additional burden on top of that, is because on top of creating the narrative domain model, you also have to do, there's a process of creating these higher level landmarks. And we did do some work in this space. I mean, this paper, this shot here is from ICAP, it could be in 2013, looking at that, looking at the shape of the this arc of the story that we want to the narrative to hit, and assisting an author with, if you like, a visual mechanism for creating those. But there's still an authorial burden, authoring burden. The second one on that perhaps I don't know, the group here are more familiar with or have worked more in that space of, is the idea of a character-based narrative planning, and particularly with the notion of intentional planning. So the sorts of example, these are slides that came from elsewhere that you're familiar with, given our canonical Aladdin structure and what we know about this world and the things that will happen, we have certain expectations about the intentions of these characters. So if our ultimate situation to end up in is that the princess is in the jail and the king is dead, we're not satisfied with a story where the princess kills the king and then locks herself in the tower. We might be if we had some kind of, feminist reimagining of this story space, but given what we normally know about the intentions of characters, the sort of shape of the story on the right-hand side is more in line with those characters acting with appropriate intentions. And so I've done some space with some work in this space with colleague Jonathan Teutenberg, and in Practical, we were particularly pleased with the name of this and the acronym, the intentional multi-agent planning with relevant actions, and pleasingly for us, it turned out to be anything but impractical. And what that allowed for was, efficient narrative planning with intent, forward search, a mixture of local character reasoning about relevant actions in the context of their intents, their goals, and global reasoning about the plan and narrative properties. Again, on the downside with that, compounds this authoring burden because there's additional authoring related to the goals and the individual character intentions. A second theme of the work, and because largely until recently especially, I've worked with a multi disciplinary team, is the means in which the narrative is presented or executed. In the bulk of the work that I've done, that's through, you know, animation 2 and 3D animation on the fly using either Unreal or Unity. And, you know, my previous uni in the UK and actually and here in Melbourne, there's a, you know, games programming stream, and, you know, a lot of people working in that space. I'm not sure if it's the same sort of profile where you are. Cinematography, so, you know, using film grammar rules from Arijon to handle camera placement, character positioning on the fly, and also some work using pre-recorded film content, actually working through with researchers who were automated segmentation of film content to do with mood, style, type of action, and using that semantic labeling of that film content to use that as the units of recombination, if you like, to be able to build up the presentation of the narrative using that content. And linked to that as well, and with more of a link to the planning side of things also, is the you know, automated staging and character control. So there was elements of that in the networking system that we had. It was AMAS 2015, I think. We were generating a large space of stories, and clearly there was no scope for scripting of the staging of those. So that was automated staging to locations of, you know, various semantic tagging, locations of suitable type and positioning appropriately. And more recently, with a student who worked on this, MISES, these defining certain regions within a virtual world, and particular rules for properties in which characters would automatically assume, almost like, you know, a director's staging instructions to those characters, different types of characters, they would adopt different types of behaviors in different regions. So it delegated a lot of the control and the burden for controlling the virtual agents. The scene there is a virtual classroom management training with badly behaved students, which, let me tell you, is quite a terrifying terrifying experience to be in. But depending on what parts of the room they are or who they're sitting next to, different types of behaviors transpire. Yeah. Okay, so the third thing that I wanted to mention, actually, which has been most, you know, of interest to me recently as well, and I probably alluded to that, is this whole issue to do with authoring domain model acquisition for planning for these types of systems. And I guess this is the dream, right? That you have on the left-hand side certain real-world phenomena, robot stacking blocks, a logistics world. You can turn the handle and outward pop, hey presto, outward pop your PDDL model. That's a big stretch, and some of the work and people that I've worked with as well have an intermediate model where they'll assume that we have some form of semantic representation of these actions at some stage. And I know that dotted line between the robot arm and the pickup A is huge, but let's just assume we have that. Interestingly, with narrative, we do have that in a form with, you know, the scripts or the text summaries or synopsis, plot synopsis, those sorts of things. It's still a big stretch from there to the PDDL, but it gives us clues. There are obviously important differences to do with narrative, that we don't have a real physical world which we're trying to capture and model, or indeed the world may only exist in an author's imagination. But let's say if we can write it down, we've got that intermediate step. So there's some work that I've done in the space with other colleagues. One was Framer, which was very much in the planning world, and the idea is moving from natural language descriptions, which in fact we do have a lot of, reports, commentaries on various processes and procedures, and looking for structural similarity to map to similar names, and then using a suite of algorithms, Lockham algorithms, for inducing a model. They build little finite state machines of the types of transitions that actions can make, and using that to induce the PDDL model. And by extension, this work in Story Framer in in a story, a narrative context, going from plot summaries, either a single plot summary, and in fact that was as far as this particular student got, looking at single input stories and mapping that to a PDDL representation, or indeed the next step would be to take multi-episode and filter them into this more extended domain model capable of generating a wider space of stories. Yeah, okay, so so that's that idea of going from the natural language, natural language traces, to looking those as sort of planned traces, to PDDL model. This work, which is interests me, is going from a partially constructed model or and extending it and looking at gaps, if you like, in the model, or possibilities to extend it. So one, this work with Anton in AMAS 2015, I believe, looking at things that aren't, transitions that aren't possible in the current model that we have. So to explain the diagram that we've here, if you've got grey mass, the semiotic square, so and looking for possible causes of failure or inability to make transitions. So if you look at the top there, where we have in blue, if you can see that, alive and dead. So we have these two contrary states of being alive and dead. And what's interesting, if you analyze some models, some of the existing models, and we did in the work, so say like the Aladdin domain model from that's been floating around in the literature, because it's taken from a single narrative, it's possible to make the transition from alive till dead, but not the reverse, or indeed to go from being single to being married, but not the reverse transition. And all of these types of, these contrary states can be identified from analysis of the model. If you look at those as little finite state machines and the transitions that are made. And interestingly, finding the ones that you can make and identifying where the reverse isn't there. Now, obviously, whether or not you want to add those to the model depends on the genre, right? I would say in a world as preposterous as Aladdin, it's perfectly feasible to come back from dead to alive, not in others. So we explored this space along the top, these contrary transitions and properties, and looked for their absence in the domain, or the absence of actions that allowed for those transitions. And also constructing these transition roles for the different types of objects, and then looking using online linguistic resources to identify suitable names to name that content. So a classic would be from single to married to married would be married, and the reverse transition, divorce. And a lot of those meaningful semantic labels it can be identified from the linguistic resources. So that was the work that was done with Anton. You can allow you to extend the model. It makes it much more diverse, because you can generate a much wider range of stories. Also a lot more robust in the space of pesky users who prevent you reaching your original story goal, or indeed open up the possibility of new goals. What we didn't explore is those other lines in the diagram there, implication, contradictory, and there's a whole possible world of transitions there, in this space, to not alive, I'm not sure what that would be, a vampire, or not dead, a zombie, depending on the genre. All these things, these are possible for extending the domain models automatically. And related to that, more recently, is some work similar, identification of new types of objects to help continue a goal. It was inspired by some planning work, actually looking at non-cooperative agents who might change the plan so an original can't be executed. That was, say, in security applications, malicious behavior in security systems. But the same applies here, and what's absent in the domains is the different types of objects that might usefully be used to make the transitions. So the example here, if you have a truck in your story. It looks very much like a logistics world problem, I know. But you have a truck and a scurrilous user breaks that, gives it a flat tire. You could mend it if you had the actions to repair it, or you could use a different vehicle. And so we can use these natural language resources, hyponym and hyponym hierarchies to identify alternative types of objects which could be used to increase the robustness and the diversity of the domains. Okay, and the fourth thing that I want to mention, and a thing that brings all this together and that I'm have been interested in as well, is the bigger world of the types of systems that we build. And related to that is this idea of naturalistic interaction. And so in the work that I've been involved with, and with others, it's naturalistic in the sense of speech, gesture, physiological signals, galvanic skin response, and EMG, or indeed brain-computer interaction. So very naturalistic types of interaction driving the systems. And also the bigger world beyond entertainment and games. So some work related to health literacy, interactive narrative, interactive storytelling, brilliant for communicating, important educational messages related to stuff like health literacy that remove the bar for reading and language requirements to a certain extent, and also in education. And I think that brings me to the end of the slides that I brought together. So questions, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. That was an incredible survey of so much work. I was familiar with about half of it, but I didn't even know about so much of the other stuff. I'm going to have to go look up some more papers.
I have to say, I've been, the bulk of that was with a lot of other people as well. Take credit for.
We had one sort of, I guess, technical question that came up. So we just, in our last meeting, read the Merchant of Venice paper. We're just moving into our section on planning-based narrative systems. We just did a big unit on like multi-agent systems, like prom week and those kind of emergent narrative systems. And we're just now moving into the plan system. So we haven't done a lot of, we haven't done the Mark Rydell intention work or any of that yet, but that's coming up.
Right.
In the Merchant of Venice paper, one thing we were all sort of blown away by was it says there's like 200 action templates in that domain. And which turns into like 1,500 possible ground actions. But when we were sort of looking at the examples, it seems like a lot of the actions are sort of tightly coupled in the sense that there was a lot of like call and response. So there was sort of a lot of like issue invitation and then like accept or reject invitation. Do you have a sense of like, yeah, there's 200 action templates, which seems like a really huge number for a typical planning problem. But do you have any sense of like the branching factor in that sort of problem? Like, is the branching factor that you're dealing with usually in the hundreds, or is it like, 5 or 10?
I knew this was going to come up, questions about papers that seem like ancient history. And
obviously no one would remember that like exact number, but is this also, I guess I just was struck by like, wow, it's so many types of actions. I wonder if that translates into a huge branching factor or not.
In the middle, I'd say. Okay. In the middle, I'd say. I wouldn't say it's huge. And we have had people from the outside and in the past go, but these problems are trivial in one sense, I mean, it translates to a huge space of actions. It always did. But yeah, I mean, I'd say in the middle. What did you say? Either in the tens or in the hundreds, somewhere in between, I guess. Yeah. Okay. I mean, it was very much, and it's a funny thing because, we were very much driven by these demonstration systems, so Merchant of Venice, all of them. I served my time at Amast running a demo and these live demos for these systems and anything can happen. That were very much, robust enough to work in those, but they were unpredictable, to say this. I think the worst one, and I don't know if you've read this, was the networking system, which was huge in that. So it was a medical drama, and the idea about that was that the point of it was that it was very flexible and it could generate a very diverse range of stories, and And it wasn't just the fact that, you know, the variety was in different characters who could appear in different places, which there were. It was more, there was different themes to the stories depending on it, whether it was romance or some medical ethics or some drama thing. So the ways in which these stories could recombine were very unpredictable. And also for the demo, the thing that people loved was they could set a social network up between the relationships between the characters. And the way that the relationships were set changed dramatically the way in which the story unwound. So you could imagine when you were running a demo, you really didn't know what was going to come up. And also, interestingly, human nature was such that people would pick the most awful, you know, everybody was secretly dating everybody else, and everybody hated everybody, you know. So yeah, so I've gone off the topic of what the question was.
I was just wondering.
Within the Merchant of Venice, it wasn't so huge. It wasn't so huge. Okay. I mean, it was contained, I guess, within that.
So that would make sense. In the sort of problems we've worked at, it's usually been somewhere in the like 10 to 20 range, and it sounds like, you know, at least somewhere in that ballpark, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing about, so networking, it was a much huger space, and we did have measures, because it was, you know, that question that people always ask is that, well, what are the stories like? What's the quality of the stories, you know? And how do you know when you're generating, you know, you don't really have control over a lot of them. What we could do was make measures, do measures of the difference between, you know, the diversity. Levenstein distance was the one that we used. As a measure of the difference, and that was measured in terms of different actions types in the plan, rather than just different parameter instantiations. Yeah. That's
great. I don't want to talk about our work while I've got you here, but one of my students is on the call right now, actually, who's tackling that problem right now. And
oh, right. Oh, interesting. Well, I mean, I'm obviously, you know, that's part of the reason why I said, oh yes, I'm happy to talk, because it's how nice to have so many students who are working in this area, right?
Yeah. So just, I guess, a more general question, something I've been presenting as a, you know, I think of the interactive narrative planning, like there's there are of course several research groups, but there's like two really big ones. There's the Michael Young group of people that I'm part of, and the Mark Cavazza and you group. And the big difference that I've sort of seen between our work is that on our side, we're kind of really interested in baking the concepts into the algorithm itself, like having a concept of intention and belief and, you know, rising action fault, like baked into the algorithm. Whereas it seems like the system, many of the systems you've built have intentionally preserved an off-the-shelf planner, presumably maybe so you can leverage the speed of those algorithms, I'm not sure. And it's been about either engineering the domain or the other pieces of the system that use the planner to get a story out of it. And I was just wondering if you had any sort of general, like, I don't know if you agree with that distinction.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's interesting because, I mean, so, you know, Mark and the group, they'd used other types of planning approaches, but before I joined them, and you know, I guess I'm guilty of being very much wedded to that, you know, old school classical AI and general models. And, you know, trying in all of this to make that connection between that dream, if you like, of general AI problem solving, planning, and yet of relevance and applicability within within this narrative space. And I like that idea myself, and I guess the others in the group took up on that as well, because you know, it does give you the full range. You can leverage the power of all of the planning systems. I obviously, you know, get that there are key and important differences, you know, when applying planning, especially to do with the types of models that we're dealing with. You know, I mean, it obviously that comes out of the talk, you know, the authoring burden, creating these things, it's a nightmare, you know, especially because what becomes interesting experimentally, but, you know, interesting and richer problem-wise in planning isn't to do with having more different types of actions, yeah, in classical planning, whereas clearly in narrative it is, yeah. It's interesting also because, you know, the Mark's group and with other people, they did do some work. So there was looking at specifics to do with more to do with the heuristic, the algorithm itself. So like David Pitsey with his PhD thesis, he did have some of that, looking at what does a heuristic mean in the narrative context, but that, I mean, related to Madame Bovary, right, and feelings of ennui, and that I do find very interesting. Also, you know, that idea of like I've, you know, taken this notion of landmarks as some kind of, you know, pseudo landmarks. They're not necessary, they don't have to be there in the plan, but they're interesting, you know, some kind of special states that we want to reach. And clearly authoring them is, you know, is an additional job, and have thought and never really dived into what that means to identify those automatically, you know, to be able to classify what those properties of those particular states are, because if you could, then again, you know, then you can leverage general AI planners to do that. Everything I say takes me back to the fact I'm wedded to that idea of general approaches.
Yeah.
But it's kind of, it's really interesting to have that, you know, conversation with yourself and with some of the others, you know, from who started off in studying with Michael. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I don't want to take up all the question time. I have an endless number of questions. I'm trying to keep it only to the exciting ones. Something that's come up both in when we read your paper last time and in the with the emergent storytelling systems was that so many of the properties of the stories we want to tell are based on sequences of actions. So it's hard, at least in some of the systems we talked about, to encode the things we want into the state. But often the properties we described are like, oh, we want 3 or 4 actions that look like this or that have this property when they're considered all together. Do you run into any of those kind of problems in what you're trying to model? Have you just been able to bake that into the state in a meaningful way? Or do you know, the way that I sort of look at it is I think of storytelling as being kind of non-Markovian, whereas classical planners make the Markov assumption that all you need to know is the current state to estimate your distance to the goal. But how you got to that state can make a big difference in some storytelling situations.
Sure. I mean, I guess it's an interesting one. I guess there's that balance, that trade-off between, you know, what you're modeling in the actions and what you're planning and how you present that, right? Because this was always very hand in hand with an eye to some kind of visualization. Yeah, basically, in fact, you know, all of the work on the systems was that would be, you know, visualized in some way. So it was more of a, you know, semantic label for the stuff that was going on at that time, you know, and there are many, many ways in which that could be presented. So it's certainly that was my view of it, you know, and it was more the, you know, some kind of units of recombination, and that, but there was an eye to how they, you know, what they meant in terms of how they would be presented. Yeah, it's an interesting one.
So it sounds like maybe in some of the applications you were working with, it wasn't come up with the domain first and then figure out how to visualize it. Was it the other way around? You had a visualization and you had to map that onto a planning domain?
No, it was a bit of both, actually. I mean, much as I say, the domain models was a huge burden to create. I mean, it's nothing compared to the content generation and you know, so that, you know, some of it's quite easy if, you know, some of it's quite easy if what an action is just dialogue between 2 or 3 characters, right? You know, because there's rules for how you stage that. If there's certain things, you know, certain scenes which are very novel, very unusual, you know, so we had some in the medical drama, you know, that are related to a patient and stuff. Those are interesting because, you know, in a way you want them to be general so that you can reuse that content. But I mean, if it's, I don't know, some surgery or giving an injection or taking a temperature, it is what it is, right? You know, yeah. Again, I'm not sure if I'm answering your questions. I'm just.
This is great. It's just, you know, just a chance to sort of get some
no,
behind the
it's
scenes
really
view.
interesting, because oftentimes you're working in a vacuum and you don't talk to, you don't talk to people who really, speak the same language.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. I've taken up a lot of questions so far. I want to open it to everybody in the class.
I had a general question, and I don't have an AI background. This is kind of an introduction to AI for me, as well as interactive storytelling. But I was curious, when we were reading the Merchant of Venice paper, how much sort of fine-grained control do you have when you're encoding this set of constraints, whether it's the general constraints for the plot or if it's a point of view constraint? Do you have a good sense beforehand how surprising maybe some of the plots that emerge from that might be? Like, do you have a sense that you have a pretty good idea of the story graph, I guess, and are you encoding them with that in mind, or are you surprised by the story graph that emerges?
Yeah, I'd say for Merchant of Venice, it was the former. I think there's a notion of where we would model these domains and extend them. There was always, I guess, an assumption we had a linear narrative, right? We had the one plot story, and then we'd create variation around that. And so it was in a relatively controlled way to grow that space, if you like. It was because of the way in which things can recombine. It would be more than just a branching plot structure, but we would incrementally extend the space, and the range of possibilities. If that makes sense.
It does, yeah.
And interestingly, when I said, so the student worked on Story Framer, which actually took pretty much the same idea, right? If you have a single plot synopsis, let's say, and you could magically turn the handle on that, which you kind of can do. If you do a sort of a grammatical pause, you pull out key actions, key objects, which you could map into a PDDL model, which would allow you to recreate the plot, right? And if you've got that, then you can start to either integrate with that plots from other stories in the same space. So if you had like episodes of Friends, say, and you could connect them together, and you create this larger space of possibilities, which is more than just a branching graph, right? Because it allows you to generate a much bigger space of stories. So surprise, no, I guess, in the sense of totally new and novel, because we know what's in there, right?
Sure. Yeah, just sort of a follow-up question. I wasn't familiar with PDDL, so I just downloaded a tutorial to look at it as I was reading the paper. How accessible do you think, a authoring system like the Merchant of Venice one that you used, where you're encoding these point of view and general constraints in PDDL, is there I don't know how to put this exactly. If you knew PDDL well and you understood the problem, obviously you could encode it. But what I wonder is how accessible something like this could potentially be for maybe an end user kind of author to try to implement.
Good question. Forget it. I mean, it's one of the, I guess it's one of the issues, right? Is that and it's across the board, right? Whether it's narrative or whether it's other applications of planning, of encoding the problem in terms of these state change actions, state transition actions is tricky. It's a different way of looking at a world, if you like, and so typically there is some kind of communication between somebody who's modeling that domain I'm somebody who's an expert in that domain.
Sure.
Now, is it possible to make tools to make that task a lot easier? Absolutely.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question.
Yeah. So again, something like say an endeavor like Story Framer, and there was a lot of limitations with it, but part of the idea would be with that is that the underpinning technology is suitable to make something that's usable by an end user, partly because you can specify it in natural language. The dream would be, tell me a story, and out the other end comes a PDL model. Okay,
Sure.
But
thank you.
Small steps along the way are possible.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, they've started. I don't know if you can hear that. They started drilling next door.
It's not coming through on our end.
Okay, good.
So it's about it's 6:45 here. It's probably, which means it's 8:45 there. I know you have to go.
Yeah.
Do you have parting? Is there any? Do you have a funny memory of a misspun tale, like a terrible, unexpected bug that arose in one of your stories that you could share?
No, I have managed to avoid that totally. But I mean, it's those hairy moments in the demos. I mean, the networking one was funny, and we had that. We won the best demo for it at ICAPS. It was back in, I don't know, was it 2013 or 2015? But that was funny, and a few of the people there, and old friends from the planning community, and they loved it, right? Because I mean, AI planning people, you won't know, but they love nothing better than an ASCII interface that have visuals and have they loved it. But one particular friend who was there, and he just wouldn't stop, and he was setting all these networks and going, "Hey, this is the same as what I saw before." I thought, it couldn't possibly be. And it was all generated on the fly. I guess it was possible that he could, set things that it would come up with the same story. But it's
Great.
So one question I did have for all of you before I go. So I don't know how it works in the States. So this is the master's class. Does that mean people are doing a PhD or not at that stage, or how does it work?
It's a graduate class, so it's master's or PhD, but I believe all 5 of the people enrolled are master's students. No, well, 4 of the 5, and then the other 2 people here, Mira Fisher and Rachel Farrell, are my PhD students.
Oh, okay.
I'm also a PhD student, but not in this in this area.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Well, very happy to. Anyway, if anybody has further questions or things, I'm very happy to talk. And when the world gets back to normal, should anybody fancy doing a bit of their stint of their studies in Australia, then that's an interesting possibility to discuss. Yeah.
That's great. I'll send them your way. Thank you so much, Julie. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I've enjoyed it. Steve's got my details should anybody have further questions or follow up then. Yeah, good luck with the course, guys.